All right.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Viaka Podcast. We're really so excited to kick things off and bring you conversations with inspirational founders, investors, and builders who have ties to the MENA region and are really making waves in the entrepreneurship space all around the world. Now, over the next few months, we're going to be chatting with entrepreneurs, fund managers, angel investors, and industry experts. You will hear their stories, lessons learned, and all the innovative work that they're doing to shape the future. So, this podcast is going to be all about insights, inspiration, and hopefully a little bit of fun. So, let's get into it.
So today, in our first episode, we're kicking things off with someone whose career perfectly bridges groundbreaking research and real-world impact. Our guest is Rania Khalaf, Chief AI Officer at WSO2, an open-source software company helping you build awesome digital experiences. With a PhD in computer science and a track record leading AI platforms at IBM Research, Rania spent over 2 decades at the intersection of AI, cloud computing, and software engineering. She's authored research with more than 8,000 citations, and today she's here to help us unpack some of the most pressing questions every startup founder is facing when it comes to AI. Rania, welcome to the Viaka Podcast.
Thank you, Ramzi. Thank you, Reem. It's great to be here.
Wonderful to have you, Rania. Let's just kick things off with you sharing with us a bit about your personal journey, Rania, and what really sparked your interest in AI, and how did you end up finding yourself where you are today? At the intersection of technology, cutting edge technology, and innovation and leadership in this field.
Well, I was born and raised in Beirut, primarily in the war. So I did go into school in like 6 different places but I finished every school year at my same school in Beirut. And growing up, my dad was an engineer. So we were always taking things apart and putting them back together. I think we had one of the first modems in the country. And we thought he was really strange when he said he wants to connect the computer to the telephone. So that made me really interested in tech from a very early age. I came to MIT for undergrad and I had planned to study architecture, but then my friends dragged me to the intro computer science class and I really liked it. So I ended up majoring in electrical engineering and computer science. And when I graduated, I went to IBM Research. I was working in a distributed systems group that was in the early days of what's called web services or service-oriented architecture, which was when it was becoming possible for applications to talk to other applications on the net. So it was a really exciting time there because I got to build some of the foundational standards that all of this communication happens across even today. So that was a time of major shift that looks very similar to what's happening right now with the major shift in computing with AI. And while I was at IBM Research, I also did my PhD at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. And then I spent a lot of time in cloud computing, building a lot of the capabilities behind microservices architecture, the service mesh, and other capabilities like that are now part of the basic building blocks of what makes cloud computing possible. And then I went to AI again because I had done AI in my master's thesis, but for a while it was the AI winter where not much was happening. And AI got exciting again with the advent of GPUs, with a lot of data being available. Neural networks were finally able to fulfill some of their initial promise and were starting to show some really exciting results. So at IBM Research, I led the deep learning, creating the deep learning training service for IBM's Watson products. So that was a really fun time because it was bridging, my history in AI with my experience in cloud computing. And then I went on to run the AI research organization that was responsible for understanding how we can make building AI applications faster, easier, and safer. So I did that for quite some time. It was very exciting. We created a lot of innovation that went directly into IBM products and created new products. from there, after nearly 20 years in IBM, I got pinged for a very exciting opportunity at a startup called Inari in the Cambridge area, which was a biotech startup. And this was COVID. So this was a company that was working with CRISPR and with AI to make seeds for plants, make them create more food and use less resources. So that tugged at my heartstrings, right? The food security and climate change are two of the most pressing topics. So I went there and did that for about 3 years as Chief Information and Data Officer. And at Inari, I really built the whole digital tech AI teams from scratch and put the foundational capabilities in place so that they could start using AI as part of their discovery process and to also make the whole production pipelines faster and more data informed. And just very, very recently, as we've seen AI really picking up again, and I've seen it that the way that we build applications and the way that we build software is changing again. Very similar to the early 2000s when the web came about and really we saw a lot of B2B applications being built. So I recently left Inari and now I'm at WSO2. And this is a global company that's really uh, providing some of the foundational software to help people build applications. And there I'm looking at how does the software stack change if you're building AI applications? If we assume that AI is in every application, the same way right now we assume that every application calls APIs or uses data, I think AI will be part of every application we build in the future. But it doesn't live on its own, right? You can't just do AI for AI. So AI has to be part of your enterprise architecture, your software stacks. And that's what we are doing at WSO2, which we're extending every piece of the software stack to help it make it more easy and first class for you to bring in AI components into your end-to-end applications that you're building. So that's it in a nutshell.
Very cool. Very cool, Rania. I want to talk a little bit about AI strategy for startups. Things about keeping up with AI developments, maybe avoiding some misconceptions. So as you know, AI is evolving really quickly today. So for startup founders who don't really have a lot of deep technical expertise, what are some of the best ways that they can stay informed or leverage AI effectively without really getting overwhelmed? Because there's so much information out there.
Yeah, there's so much happening, and I feel it's a full-time job. It used to be a full-time job just to keep up, and now it's even worse. I think there are several 100,000 papers being published every year in AI now. So even if you try to read, like when you read one paper, and these are heavyweight academic papers, right? But when you read one paper a day, you don't even make a dent. So forget it, right? And that's aside from the number of startups being created, the amount of the size of the market. It's just massive. And there's things that are coming up new that are very research. We don't know. You need to experiment. And then there are some things that are ready to use today in production to really start seeing some cost savings, to really start seeing some ways to disrupt your market, to create new streams of revenue from using this technology well. So I think that's a very important thing that someone should really think about when looking at these things. Now we're seeing that the pace is very fast. So it used to take about 2 years from when a technology shows up until it's used at scale in production. With AI, this is now like 6 weeks. So, and it's not just AI in general. It's really been this shift to foundation models. Because before, to build some AI in your company, you needed to get your data, clean it. You need massive amounts of data to build some models, to start creating predictions and seeing value. With foundation models, a lot of that shifted to these really big companies that have the means to train massive models that are generalists. And then for you to use AI now, it becomes closer to an integration problem. So how can you bring these into your environment and to your use case? And how can you use your own data and expertise and industry knowledge to adapt them and build the layers around and above them? There is still, of course, a space for building machine learning models that are not Gen AI models and don't need big foundation models. But this is the shift that we've seen recently that's really, really sped up adoption and made it kind of put it in the hands of everybody. So that's enough first cut, right? Try to understand what is new and exciting and trends, and then what is something you can use today and start to build foundations around. Knowing that these things are evolving quickly. The ways that I, for example, stay in touch is, there's a few podcasts, newsletters I subscribe to. My LinkedIn feed is heavily curated, so I follow certain people, right, that are summarizing what's happening. And I think just being part of this community is very exciting and interesting. So that's one way. The other way I think that's super important, and I think the best, most effective way, is to build stuff. It's now become really easy to build things with AI. So I think if you're a builder, go ahead and build. Try. When you hear about new things, there's always how to get started, how to get going. There's free courses. There's all of this wonderful resources around that what you need, you could argue, is the most valuable resource is time. But if you had the time, then that's where I would recommend to spend it, to really understand how this technology works. There's nothing better than firsthand experience. And then even if you're not a builder, you can just start to use it. There's a lot of AI out there that had what was called its Netscape moment, when ChatGPT, just put out the GPT, broke GPT from behind their APIs into the chat interface. Now anybody without a computer science understanding could suddenly access the tech. So just use it, try it, and understand what it does. I think that's the biggest advice I have for how to stay up to date. Your next question was about how do you, so you asked about how do you save the date because it's changing super fast, and then you had another part to that question. Can you repeat?
How can we leverage AI effectively without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah. So I think you need to build things that work and figure out what you're going to track to see if what you did helped or hindered, right? So the idea is, build fast, but build things that matter, and then try to get them into production and really getting value, and get a way to measure if what you've done is are people using it? Are they accepting the suggestions that it's giving them? Are they getting value, right? And tweak as you go. The space software in general, over the past maybe 15 years or so, has been very much about iterate quickly and get feedback, and really going to this agile development and closed feedback, fast feedback loops. And I think now it's even more the case, right? So that you can adjust and adapt what you're building quickly. The other part of advice, I think, is to be very careful of understanding a bit more about what these models do and what their shortcomings are, so that you can use them effectively for what they're good at. So it's easy to think, oh, these models, they're passing the bar exam and they're winning math Olympiads, and therefore they are all knowing and always right.
So this was, this leads me to my second question, which is more about misconceptions about AI. So what are some traps that founders might fall into when using AI technology?
That's a great question, because if you just look at all the hype around AI, it's either a lot of excitement and people think this is fantastic, but with all that optimism also comes an idea that these models and these capabilities are all-knowing, all-powerful, and always right, which is very dangerous. Sure, they are passing the bar exam, they are winning math Olympiad, etc. They're breaking benchmarks. However, if you think about fundamentally how they work, which is they're doing some prediction about what comes next in whatever it is they're doing, then that helps you understand that they are still much more in a creative space than in a fact-finding space. So what I mean by that is one of the big pitfalls of these models right now is what's known as hallucination. So this is the idea that this is like you're really good. I have this really good friend. I like to give this example. Wonderful person, very polished British accent, great credentials. And whatever you ask him, he always has an answer. and he will never admit if he's wrong. So if we ask him something, and then he'll string all the nicest buzzwords, all the very beautiful English words, very well spoken, and we'll always have an answer for you. And when he's giving you an answer of something he really knows, it's the best answer. But when he doesn't know, he's just going to string some stuff together and answer with confidence. So it's up to me to figure out, like, when is he hallucinating and when is he not? I think ChatGPT and these Gen AI models are still like that. There's been a lot of work to help mitigate this hallucination by checking them against articles, getting resources, giving them more context. But these are just ways of getting around how they fundamentally work. So I think if you're a founder, one of the things you could do is to say, where are these things great? Like, they're great at creative spaces. They're great at summarizing. They're great at, let me brainstorm panel questions and what I'm going to do in a demo and things like this, right? They're conversational. They seem, you can give them different tones. They can be friendly. They can draw people out of their shell. So there's a lot of places where they're really fantastic. And then there's a lot of places around facts, around mathematics, around coding, where they are being specialized for those domains, and things can go wrong. Things can go really, really well if it's in a very constrained space for a specific use case, but also for the parts that are focused on language, that is not their strong suit. So in one of the examples, I was planning a trip to Costa Rica, and I was trying to get the model to help me plan my driving route. And, it did a very, very basic addition wrong. Like, it added the how many hours each leg of the trip is very wrong. And that's because the piece of the model, normally if it knew it was doing math or something like that, it would go to another part that would do that well. But I guess because the question was about many other things, it didn't do that. So it just came up with a number. So you still have to watch out about what's really going on there. The other piece you see a lot is, so first is like temper the optimism with the reality. And the other is there's a lot of also fear that is like, they're going to take over our lives and humans it's the end of humanity, Terminator, we're dead. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Yes, there's ways to trick them. There's been quite a few examples of people hacking these models, trying to make them give you bad information, or people using them maliciously, like if you know all these old bot farms and scamming farms, right? Now imagine instead of having 100 people somewhere, they're just, all these free bots are working 24/7, convincing an elderly person to wire them money and open their bank account and log into God knows what. So there is a lot of work around responsible AI. So I would say that's another area where one should be aware and vigilant, but don't get overwhelmed and scared and do nothing, right? There is so much opportunity, and there's so many ways to do it well. And there are so many tools you can use to get started to do a reasonable safety around what you're doing, right? And who knows what happens in a million years. Like when books first came out, like were a thing, I think there was a quote about how like the minds of the youth will be ruined if they sit around in a corner reading a book all day instead of talking to people, right? Familiar, right? With screens and screen time. And so whenever something new happens, we still have to learn how to use it, right?
Yes. With things moving so fast, really, how can startups today ensure they're not really just, hopping on the next trend, like that they're actually future proofing, their AI strategy for the long-term success?
Yeah, it's a tough time now too, because the big AI players are also adding a lot to the models, to their offerings around the models themselves. So that's also been very difficult for startups. So some startups, were created as a layer on top of some of these models, right? And then whatever, OpenAI or Anthropic decide to bring a capability like that in the model, and then poof, all those startups become not so useful, right? I think one of the big opportunities right now is in verticals, which is in really thinking about what does it mean to bring AI native applications into a space like healthcare, insurance, finance, wellness, whatever is your the vertical of choice, and bring the deep expertise in that domain and build the layers on top that specialize for solving problems there. You can think about it a little bit like when electricity first came about. So electricity is known as a general purpose technology. So this is another interesting parallel that's been brought as GPT, which is these Gen AI capabilities as general purpose technologies. And what you could have done there to start could have been to say, oh, okay, I have a factory floor, I build automobiles, and I can use my first step is to replace every gas light fixture with an electric light fixture. Right? That'll get you a little step of the way. It's not very differentiated. But where the real opportunity is can I imagine my whole factory floor now that I have electricity and things can be automated and mechanized, and now it's not like how do I do what I already do faster and cheaper, but how do I solve the problem of, I don't know, build a toothbrush or an automobile or whatever it is you're building in your factory in a very different way. And that takes imagination, right? Because that's not about asking the customer, what do you want? But about imagining what the future could look like, right? And maybe creating a need. So I think that's where, you can be bold, and you have to be bold. And also what I think can give you a lot of differentiation, right? So I think it's those two things. It's the vertical space is very interesting about how areas are being disrupted. And the other is don't just do small optimization on what people already do. Can you think again about what the problem is and who the users that have this problem, and how can you now rethink the solutions towards that if you had AI in your toolbox, right?
Fascinating. Rania, let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about a topic that is on top of the mind of all founders, and that is team building and resource management, and the meager resources that startups basically have. As you know, tech talent is scarce, very hard to find. It's very expensive, and startups really struggle when they want to hire top AI talent because there is massive competition from the big, tech companies, and then there are also the salary constraints. So what advice would you give startups, especially the early stage startups? What are some creative ways for those founding teams that they can, where they can build a strong AI function without really breaking the bank?
Yeah. So, it's expensive, but it also brings a lot of value. And that's where you have to think about what value are you trying to create for the company? What problem are you solving? And what are the expertise that you need to address that gap? So that might not be, I need bleeding edge researchers who are publishing in like the most competitive AI industry, academic research conferences, right? You might need people that do more applied work. And then another thing to think about is that a lot of people, yes, money matters, but a lot of people also are really looking to do meaningful work. They're looking to work in a place that has a healthy culture, that they can bring their whole selves to work. So there are a lot of opportunities for companies to attract top talent because people value a lot more than just the money. Now, of course, you can't pay like a pittance, right? It has to be somewhat competitive and rewarding. Equity is a very important part of that deal for startup, is something they have. People care also about what if their work matters, right? So what are they working towards? Is what they're building going to make a difference? And that is something you can really screen for and help with. So, but if you have like an awful environment and you're not paying people and the work is not going to go anywhere, then, it's questionable whether you should keep going, but nobody will, it'll be very, very hard to hire there. Right.
Yeah.
No matter what you paid. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. So I think mission, culture, environment, and really doing things that you think work, and then being fair to your employees to say, listen, we're going to create value together and we're going to share in the value we create, right? So you're not going to give them money for free just because some friend makes that money somewhere else. And you're not going to say, hey, I can't pay you, that's the market. But you can say, hey, we're going to build value together, and you're going to, whatever value you built, you're going to get equity, you're going to get some of it back, like kind of in part to the value you are bringing.
Yeah.
And that feels fair to people, right?
Yeah, and it resonates with the younger generation. I think this whole culture of I'm part of something as well. It's not just the money. Money is important, but I'm also part of something. And then the company culture as well. Once we post this podcast, it would be very interesting to see. Would love to see comments and interaction from startups on this point. So that would be interesting. To hear their feedback on that. But I also wanted to check. I mean,
sorry, Reem. Can I add one more thing?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. So another point to be very careful about is that AI means many, many, many things. So first, also, just make sure you have your data in a place that can be used by AI. Make sure you have data engineers and a good data platform structure, whatever, right? And then the other point is for your AI folks, don't underestimate also that now, because of the work that's been done around foundation models, some of the new things that are coming up are only a couple of years old. So it's not like you'll find someone who has 20 years of experience and this, right?
Yes.
So that means that you can train some of your people that are in your company that are really smart and sharp, and they can start to use and learn, and you can get them very quickly up to speed if you give them the space to learn, experiment, explore, and they can become experts, right?
Yeah. Fascinating. No, definitely fast evolving field. Definitely. Is it a possibility to have like an outsourced AI team? And if a startup decides to do this, how important is it for, like, let's say the non-technical team members, like the marketing team or the business development or maybe the finance team? How important is it for them also to be plugged in and really understand AI basics, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really important point. People are, I forget now the exact numbers, but there's been a few studies from BCG and McKinsey and others about how much of the solution in AI or the value from AI comes from the AI technology and how much is people and process and so on. And the amount that's the tech is very small. It's shockingly small. I forget the amount, but it's like less than a quarter, I think. What people need to really understand is that this is not something that lives aside on its own in a vacuum. AI by itself does nothing, right? It has to be brought into your processes, and it has to be, then your processes have to change. That means the people that own that P&L, the people that own that product, the people that do those jobs need to buy in, and they need to know how this makes their jobs better and their business more successful and their life easier, or they're not going to come to the table.
Yeah.
Right? And if they don't come to the table, you're not going to get the AI to have any value at your company because it's not going to be allowed to transform anything. Yeah. So that's really important to understand. And what tracks from there is right now, what we're seeing is that the companies that are doing really well in AI transformation and being able to take advantage of what's happening and stay ahead and really beat their competition are the companies where the C-suite understands AI, and the CEO is sponsoring AI efforts and is asking everybody for metrics of adoption or ROI, or really pushing that forward. Mm-hmm. That's going to be really critical, because if this is not before, if maybe 10 years ago or 6, it was enough to say, I have an AI strategy, I hired a research team, they're over there, they're publishing papers and they're making some press, and we do 1 or 2 things. This time is finished now. right?
Yeah.
People want to see, like, industries are being completely reshaped with AI. And if you're in that space, that's what you're looking for, disrupting, or at least they'll get disrupted, and you need to move really fast. So the more that the leadership understands this technology, the better, because
Yeah.
it's going to be used by everyone, it's going to benefit everyone. And the numbers I've seen quoted for any kind of transformation, even when before was cloud and before was digital, right, is about 30, 30, 30. So you'll have about 30% of people will like rush to embrace new things because they think it's cool, it's exciting, they have a growth mindset, they want to learn. About 30% will like grunt and groan, but they will come. And there's about 30%, and maybe that number is not quite right, but somewhere around there, they're never gonna come. They're not interested, they don't like change, right? And
Yeah.
that's going to be a conversation about what happens then, right? Could be a different job role, or maybe those jobs don't get too impacted. I'm not really sure, but this is something that is changing how everybody is working, right? And it's
Fascinating.
a team sport, right?
Yeah.
This is not only for the tech team to do.
It's amazing how AI is not just, disrupting technology, but also all the other, non-technical roles within a venture. They all have to keep up and be,
Yeah.
get up to speed. Definitely. A final question when it comes to just the team structure. When like a startup is, definitely applying AI and embedding it across all its functions, how important is it to have deep domain expertise? Does like can strong AI capabilities like compensate for a lack of industry experience, let's say, or domain expertise remains to be a critical component?
Depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to build a tech startup that's doing just tech, then your domain is technology and AI, and then the domain expertise is baked into the AI expertise. But if you're trying to do a healthcare startup and you have no one in your team that's done anything with healthcare, you are at a really, really big disadvantage. It's going to be very, very hard to make a difference there, even if you build a model that beats some benchmark at a prediction, right? Because so much more goes into adopting AI in real life than just the model and how it performs on a benchmark or how much accuracy or whatever it has, right? These implications are as simple as, will the user trust the model's answer? And there's a whole space around trusted AI and human computer interaction with AI and so on, and explanation, explainability, etc. Very big open space. Two, how do you go to market? How do you sell?
Yeah.
You may need to know how insurance works. You may need to know other things. So right now, I think the industry experience is very, very important, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you asked also the question about outsourcing, insourcing. So I thought a lot about that over the years. I was fortunate in IBM. We had like world-class people everywhere, and I was in research, so we worked closely with the product teams, but and we had global teams all around the world that were part of IBM Research that worked on these problems. In Inari was a startup, so I built an AI team there, a smaller one. But we always also worked with outside companies. We brought in consultants, we brought in expertise. So if you need deep expertise in a particular domain for a short amount of time, it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to get a consultant, right? Or to outsource that piece somewhere. What I think is really important though is you want the technical leadership for what's happening to be in-house.
Yeah.
Because if you're building differentiated technology that is going to differentiate your company, you want to make sure that what you're outsourcing is something you understand how it works, you know it's going to be useful, and you can, when the consultants leave or they change them up on you because they put them on some other project, you know what you're getting and you can evolve it. Because like we said, this stuff moves super, super fast and you need to be able to take it and keep running with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very valid points.
Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
don't outsource your core competency.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Very important advice.
Yeah.
Because a lot of companies today, they could, there's a lot of debate about, why don't we just outsource the tech and then we figure things out. So today it's more about let's outsource the AI version and let's work on very cool. It's very cool to know how it works.
It depends on what your business model is. Like if, for example, when I was at Inari, it was Copilot and so on were just coming out. And at that point, my core competency is doing gene discovery for seeds so they can make more food, use less water, nitrogen. I'm putting my AI team to work on that problem. I'm going to wait for the Googles and the Microsofts and so on to embed Copilots in all the products I already buy, because they all were going to do it. It was clear, right? And I'm going to buy that. So I'm going to off the shelf those components. So I think this question of do you buy off the shelf? Do you build in-house? Do you acquire? That question is always there and very present. And it's going to depend on, is that thing part of your core competency and your moat and your differentiation? Is it something that just makes you better? And if you can only have, like we talked about, these talent are expensive. So how can you want to use them on the thing that makes the most difference? You don't want to use them to build commodity software that, like, there's companies that's all they do is build, something to summarize your meetings and put to-do items, even though that would be cool to have. If I'm at Inari, I'm not putting my AI engineers on that ever, right?
Of course.
Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And another thing to watch out for is another thing to watch out for with AI teams and talent is you want to make sure you're helping them to build things that matter and helping that what they build really makes it into the value that it can have. So often what we see is if you have a central AI team that's serving other parts of the business, they will love to have brainstorm sessions with your team to say, oh, I have this problem. Yeah, that's great. Let's work on it. Let's build a thing. But when it comes time that you build a thing and it's a prototype, and then it comes time to really use it, and a lot of projects fail then. They stop working then. And that's very dangerous. Because what happened was at the beginning, there wasn't an agreement about if we can do this, if AI can do X, and we can show that can happen, because before you do it, you often don't know. Then what does that mean for the team that's going to adopt that thing? What changes for them? And are they committed to make those changes once that happens? Right? Because this thing is probably going to replace a piece of their existing workflow, change a tool, change a skill set. Someone's going to have to do a thing differently to really make it part of the production flows. And that's where, leadership can really help.
Yeah.
This kind of leads me to my next question. When it comes to AI systems and how fast things are moving, what can startups really do from day one to make sure that, their AI architecture is flexible, adaptable, it's not gonna, it's not gonna break or maybe go obsolete in 6 months?
Yeah, that's a tough call. It's hard right now to make any huge calls like that, but I think you want to build with modern stacks. You want to use the ecosystem has been lovely. It's very open. There's a lot of information and training out there. There are a lot of services you can get from the different providers, but then you have to weigh the cost and the risk and the latency issues around that. I think that's a tough question. I don't know. I think you have to, you need a good people with really strong engineering and architectural skills that are tapped into the ecosystem. And that's going to help you a lot. Because the space moves quickly and some things, they might look like they have legs and then they don't, or suddenly come out of nowhere and become the central thing in the whole thing, like agents now. Everyone, like the last 2 months,
nobody really knows.
Agents.
Nobody really knows what's what's going to stay for and what's going to go.
I think agents are here to stay, but I think they are like all the pieces suddenly were available to make it work. and now they're starting to work. Now, are they going to be like your digital teammates in your
Mm-hmm.
workforce and have a human manager that can give them an evaluation? I don't know, right? But they're here and they're already doing a lot of work, and we can build them now. So I think you just have to think of this as a time of major tech disruption, like when the car was created and the electricity and the internet, and right, it's just now it's happening much. This has always been a time of great, like, remember the dot-com bubble? I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but right? So it's a time like that where there's a lot of startups will happen, a lot will, some will, huge mega companies will be created, a lot will fail, a lot will get subsumed. It's okay, right? There's a time of great experimentation, and we're gonna have to learn. Nobody really knows the answer. If anyone tells you they know the answer, they're making it up. Like,
They don't know.
nobody knows. We're creating it now, right? And it's one big experiment, and it's a great time to be doing this stuff.
It's
Right?
exciting.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. So, I mean, we're just coming up to the end of our episode, Rania. Honestly, this was like so insightful. But before we wrap up, I just have one final question. This is something you brought up earlier. You mentioned the importance of responsible AI and ethics. As startups begin to integrate AI into their products, what are some, like ethical considerations that they need to keep in mind early on? And the important question here is, how can they balance this, like the speed of things with the whole aspect of responsibility? And why is it important to think along the lines of ethical AI?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in there, I think, and all of it's important. Let me think through that for a second. I think, so why is responsible AI important? Responsible AI means many things. All right. First, it means I'm not going to run off with your data and do bad things with it. That's obvious one. It also means I'm going to not do things that can have consequences that affect equity or fairness, or in a negative way. That is, examples of that are models that might discriminate against people for race or gender or whatever, for pay, for interviews, scheduling, resume scanning. HR is fraught with these problems.
Yeah.
But it can also be about understanding how these models work and what it means when we talk about how good they are, because that really depends on the application. So I'll give you a simple example of that. So for a while, I was the kind of like in a chief of staff role for the CTO for IBM Cloud. And he gave this wonderful example. At the time, people were saying about cloud adoption, like, like Netflix is using it, it's fantastic, but the banks were worried to move to the cloud. And the thing there was, well, it really depends on your application. So the cost of the thing being wrong or making a mistake, in that case, it was, if I'm streaming a movie on Netflix and it skips a few frames or loses a few packets, okay, whatever, right? I still get my movie and I'm fine. But if this is a bank transaction and a few $1 million go missing, it's not a joke.
Yeah.
And my example for AI, which is just to make it very clear, especially for me, this rings personal, which is if you think of computer vision models. So if I have a model that tells who people are, right, from their pictures, and I'm a social networking company, and if that thing is wrong, maybe I think, oh no, Reem was at a party and she told me she was sick at home, but whatever. I know she was at the party because I got a notification. Because, whatever. The app figured out and notified. That's okay. But if someone takes that same technology and that same model, which is like 99.99% of the time it's fine, and then uses it to put in a drone that does like some, warfare, or, targets somebody for unsavory things, right? Then you're talking about a life or more that's impacted. So it's the same model, but the how do you say, the appetite, or there's a word for this that I'm forgetting now, but the ability to absorb mistakes or things being wrong or whatever, right, is very different. The sensitivity to error
Yeah.
is very different, and it's very dependent on the application and the domain and
Yeah.
the situation and the context.
Yeah.
So that is something to think very carefully about. When you take a model off the shelf from some model zoo or model directory catalog somewhere, really think about what the model does and what it's good at and what it's not and where it fails and whatever, and think about what you're going to use it for and how you're going to mitigate
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's really important with responsibility and AI, is that these models can make mistakes. They're using a lot of people's data. They're being used to make decisions that could be life or death or very impactful for people.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be on top of that, and we need to be thinking and designing for that. And the lovely thing is that this space is very, very active. So there are a lot of open source libraries. There's a lot of active research. There's regulation coming, from, as we hear, from different places. So there's a lot happening in that space. So it's the same story. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Think about how you can use the pieces of it that help you solve the problem that you're trying to solve, and the pieces of it that apply to your domain, and start with those, right?
Yeah.
And bake it in. You can add it later. Like if
Yeah.
you think about it at the very end, right before you deliver,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. Right?
Yeah. So it's not just, being ethical and responsible, but you could really jeopardize getting, reputational hit risk. And then, also your bottom line could get hit as well. So there are so many different business considerations to not acting responsibly with AI, definitely. Rania, this was absolutely incredible. I mean, even for me personally, I'm not a technical person. So much to unpack and so much to, learn so much with us. Your insights, your personal journey, unbelievable. You're such an inspiration. And I'm sure that you're going to inspire so many entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs as well in the STEM field. Amazing. Is there anything just before we wrap up, anything like final you'd like to share? And you mentioned that you listen to podcasts, or any resources that you would advise young and upcoming entrepreneurs to follow or listen to, or a book to read. We'd love your recommendation there as well.
Sure. No, I think this was really wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. The big advice is, don't be afraid. Try things, get your hands dirty, and don't be afraid of failure. Like, this is now a very exciting time, and nobody knows, we're writing the future. So just go for it and learn, right? For online resources, there's a lot out there. One of my favorites is Andre Karpathy. He has some longer videos that explain a lot about AI and how LLMs work and how he's using them and so on. I really find the way he explains things to be really, really lovely. So that's one pointer there. And thank you so much for having me. This was really,
Thank you.
really great.
Thanks for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. We appreciate your time.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you, Rania. Thank you so much, my dear. Thank you.